And if you don't want to talk about where babies come from, you don't have to.
It's been 60 years since Family Affair first aired on CBS, and the premise was simple. 3 orphan children, 1 bachelor uncle, 1 unflappable butler. 5 seasons, 138 episodes, a show built on the idea that love alone could hold a family together. What happened to the people who made that argument is far more complicated. Let's see where they are in 2026. Anissa Jones as Buffy Davis. Anissa Jones was born Mary Anissa Jones on March 11, 1958 in Lafayette, Indiana. She was 8 years old when Family Affair premiered, the youngest of the 3 child leads, the girl with the pigtails, the doll. The Mrs. Beasley doll. That is how most people remember Buffy, the blonde child clutching a cloth doll with glasses and a polka dot dress, talking to her in the voice of someone who needed something from the conversation she couldn't get anywhere else. The doll became a merchandise phenomenon because of what Jones made it mean. The comfort of an object that cannot leave you, that will always look the same. The kind of comfort orphan children develop an elaborate relationship with, because the things that feel permanent are also the things that don't breathe. She was 8. She conveyed that every week for 5 years. Tragically, the story that follows shadows every conversation about Family Affair. Jones left acting when the show ended in 1971. She was 13, not equipped for what came after. The absent structure, the money that hadn't been protected, the specific loneliness of having been for 5 years the most innocent child on American television and then being asked to be a regular teenager in a world that had already watched her grow up. She died on August 28, 1976 in Oceanside, California. She was 18 years old. The cause was combined drug intoxication. She had been out of the public eye for 5 years. Gone 5 years and 28 days after the show's final episode. There was no comeback. There was only Buffy, preserved in 138 episodes, and then silence. America remembered Buffy as the safest child on television. Anissa Jones became the show's first great heartbreak, and the name that comes up every time anyone asks what Family Affair really cost. Brian Keith as Uncle Bill Davis. Brian Keith was born Robert Alba Keith on November 14, 1921 in Bayonne, New Jersey. He was 44 years old when Family Affair began, already a major Hollywood presence stretching back to the late 1940s. The role was first offered to Glenn Ford. Ford turned it down. Keith took it and also took a partial ownership stake in the production, placing him in a fundamentally different relationship to the show's economics than any castmate. Uncle Bill wasn't the warm TV father America already knew. He was a bachelor engineer, self-sufficient, happy with a life organized around his own needs, who had 3 orphan children placed into that life without warning. What made him work was Keith's refusal to perform the transformation. He didn't suddenly become the perfect parent. He became something more honest, a man visibly learning what it meant to be needed by people he hadn't chosen. Kathy Garver described him as warm, generous, and especially good with the children, off camera as well as on. The production scheduled shooting in 60-day blocks to accommodate his film commitments, a detail that tells you exactly how much leverage he carried. He received 3 Emmy nominations for the role. He never won. But here's where things get devastating. In his final years, Keith's health declined seriously. Then, in June 1997, his daughter Daisy died by suicide at 27. 19 days later, on June 24th, Brian Keith died by suicide at his home in Malibu. He was 75 years old. Kathy Garver honored him at his Hollywood Walk of Fame ceremony, speaking about what he had meant to the cast. The man who spent 5 seasons playing television's steadiest guardian ended his life in the least steady chapter it had seen. Not a contradiction, but what grief and illness together are capable of doing, regardless of the characters a person has played. Sebastian Cabot as Mr. French. Sebastian Cabot was born Charles Sebastian Thomas Cabot on July 6, 1918 in London. He was 48 when Family Affair began, a large, elegantly rotund Englishman with a voice like warm mahogany and the bearing of a man who had decided dignity was the most interesting thing a person could project. He had been acting since the 1930s across British and American film, television, and voice work. Disney fans knew his voice before his face. He narrated numerous animated features. By the time he arrived on Family Affair, he understood exactly what Mr. French required. Formality concealing warmth. Reserve concealing affection. Pomposity one breath away from surrendering to love. What made Mr. French unforgettable was contrast. He was not the comic butler played for laughs. He was a man of genuine dignity placed in a situation that continually asked him to set it aside, and who did so every time with something that looked, if you paid attention, like relief. Kathy Garver said it plainly. The contrast between Cabot's formal precision and Keith's rough warmth was what made the show work. But here's where things get interesting behind the scenes. Midway through the series, Cabot became seriously ill and the show had to write around his absence, bringing in John Williams as Nigel French, Mr. French's brother, to cover the gap. When Cabot returned, the show exhaled. He had 3 children. He continued acting after Family Affair. Voice work, television, the warm aftermath of a career that gave him more recognition than most British character actors received in America. Sebastian Cabot died on August 23, 1977 in Victoria, British Columbia, following a stroke. He was 59 years old. Mr. French was never a trap. He was a portrait, and Cabot sat for it willingly and made something that outlasted him. Johnny Whitaker as Jody Davis. Johnny Whitaker was born John Orson Whitaker Jr. on December 13, 1959 in Van Nuys, California. He was 6 years old when Family Affair premiered, cast on the direct recommendation of Brian Keith, who had worked with him on The Russians Are Coming. When producers saw Whitaker alongside Anissa Jones, they made Jody and Buffy twins on the spot. Jody Davis was the show's comic heart and its tender one simultaneously. The small, red-haired boy who could make you laugh in one scene and hollow you out in the next. Whitaker brought an instinctive naturalism that child actors spend years trying to find. He wasn't performing Jody, he simply was Jody, for 5 seasons, in the way only very young actors can be. When he turned 18, the money his years of work had generated was not waiting for him. Kathy Garver said it plainly. When Johnny turned 18, there was not all the money there that should have been. It was not an isolated problem. It was the industry's standard operating procedure before child actor protection laws had teeth. Drug and alcohol addiction took hold through his 20s following personal tragedies, including the death of Anissa Jones in 1976, his screen twin, gone at 18. An intervention eventually reached him. He got sober. He became a sobriety counselor and founder of a recovery program, turning his own wreckage into something useful for others. He appeared in the 2002 Family Affair reboot and made a public apology on Oprah, Where Are They Now, in 2016. He is 66 years old in 2026. The red-haired child audiences wanted to protect spent years having to rescue himself. He did. And then he spent the rest of his life helping other people do the same. Kathy Garver as Cissy Davis. Kathy Garver was born Kathleen Marie Garver on December 13, 1945 in Long Beach, California. She was 20 when Family Affair premiered, playing a teenager convincingly while already a trained adult actress. The original actress became unavailable during pilot production, and Garver stepped in at the last minute. What the producers got was the emotional anchor of the entire series. Cissy Davis wasn't the cute one. She wasn't the one on the lunchboxes. She was the big sister, holding herself together while also holding Buffy and Jody together in a penthouse presided over by an uncle who had never planned to be anyone's father. What Garver brought was a quiet intelligence that made Cissy's sacrifice feel real rather than sentimental. She wasn't performing maturity, she was demonstrating it. But here's where things get really interesting. While her younger castmates struggled, the missing money, the addiction, the grief, Garver built something the industry rarely allows: a career with a second act, a third, and a fourth. She wrote Surviving Cissy, developed an audiobook narration career, wrote children's books, and appeared in the 2002 reboot. She spoke publicly about child star economics, noting her parents had protected her earnings in ways other families had not. A statement that landed differently once you knew what had happened to Jody's money, and to Buffy's life. Her parents did that. She did the rest herself. She married David Travis in 1981, had a son Reed, and was with him for over 4 decades until his death in 2025. Kathy Garver is 80 years old in 2026, the oldest surviving principal cast member, the last one still actively preserving the show's history. Of all the original cast, she most completely turned survival into authorship. She didn't just outlast the show, she understood it. Heather Angel as Miss Faversham. Heather Angel was born on February 9, 1909 in Oxford, England. She was 57 years old when Family Affair began, a veteran of British and American cinema stretching back to the early 1930s. By the time she arrived as Miss Faversham, the companion figure orbiting Mr. French's world, she was a supporting player in the autumn of a long career, adding refinement to scenes that needed it. Miss Faversham wasn't a plot-driving character. She was a tonal one, signaling that Mr. French's formal world had a history behind it. What made Heather Angel interesting was never the character. It was the 60 years she carried onto the set. But here's where things get shocking in a way no episode of Family Affair ever approached. In 1970, while the show was still in its final season, Heather Angel witnessed the murder of her husband, director Robert B. Sinclair, during a home intrusion. He was killed in front of her. They had been married since 1944. She was 61 years old. The violence was sudden, senseless, and left her a widow in the most brutal possible way. She continued living. She continued occasionally working. Heather Angel died on December 13, 1986 in Santa Barbara, California. She was 77. The cause was cancer. She played refinement on screen. Real life gave her one of the most violent losses in this entire cast. Proof that the world the show presented, where the worst things families faced were the kind love could resolve by the episode's end, was not the world these people lived in. John Williams is Nigel Niles French. John Williams was born Hugh Ernest Leo Williams on April 15, 1903 in Chalfont, St. Giles, England. He was around 64 when he stepped onto the Family Affair set in 1967. Not because he had auditioned, not because the producers had planned for him, but because Sebastian Cabot had fallen ill and the show needed someone to hold the space. That is a specific kind of professional courage. Arriving on a beloved series mid-run, playing the brother of the character the audience already loved, knowing your job is not to replace what was there, but to ensure the show continues until the real thing returns. Williams did it with the grace of a man who had spent 60 years in theater and understood that sometimes the work is about service, not recognition. Nigel French, Mr. French's brother, slightly less formal, equally devoted to the Davis children, gave the show a breathing space it hadn't expected to need. Williams filled it without overreaching, without leaving marks that would complicate Cabot's return. He was married to Helen Williams. He died in 1983 at 80. He was the substitute audiences accepted because the original could not continue. A role born from illness, not design. In a cast full of people who became famous for what they built, he is quietly remarkable for what he preserved. Nancy Walker as Emily Turner. Nancy Walker was born Anna Myrtle Swoyer on May 10, 1922 in Philadelphia, daughter of a vaudevillian father who performed as Dewey Bartow. She grew up understanding that entertainment was labor and the audience never needed to know the performer's real name. She was 47 when she joined Family Affair in its 5th and final season as Emily Turner, the part-time housekeeper brought in to assist Mr. French. The role was modest. The actress was not. By the time Walker stepped onto the Family Affair set, she was already Tony Award nominated for Broadway, a veteran of MGM musicals, the kind of comedic actress who made everything look effortless through precision-trained effort. Within a few years, she would become a household face as Rhoda's mother on Rhoda and as Rosie in one of the most enduring paper towel campaigns in television history. Emily Turner was a footnote in her career. Walker gave it timing, warmth, and the authority of someone who had been doing this longer than most of the production had been alive. She directed as well. Her 1980 film Can't Stop the Music is one of the era's more distinctive curiosities. She married twice and had one daughter, Miranda. Nancy Walker died on March 25, 1992 in Studio City, California. She was 69. The cause was lung cancer. In the Family Affair story, she is the footnote. In the story of American television comedy, she is something considerably larger. She arrived near the end of everything. She had been building her legacy since before most of the cast was born. John Hubbard as Ted Gaynor. John Hubbard was born on April 14, 1914 in East Chicago, Indiana. He was 52 years old when Family Affair began, playing Ted Gaynor, Uncle Bill's business partner, the professional anchor who grounded Bill Davis's engineering world and gave the show a sense that its bachelor hero had a life beyond the penthouse. Hubbard appeared in 8 episodes. He was never the face on the lunchbox. He was never the subject of a retrospective. He was the working actor in the supporting role every show needs and almost no one thinks about until they try to imagine the show without him. What made Ted Gaynor quietly essential? A bachelor engineer with no family history of fatherhood needed a professional peer who could reflect back who he had been before the children arrived. Someone representing the life Bill Davis had chosen and was now being asked to reconsider. Hubbard played that function with the reliable precision of a character actor who understood his job was to serve the story, not steal it. He was married for nearly 50 years to Lois Hubbard and had 3 children. He died in 1988 at 74. He was never the face anyone remembered, but he was part of why the faces people do remember worked, and in an ensemble, that is its own form of indispensability. Rapid fire, the faces you almost remember. Not everyone in Family Affair had 5 seasons. Some had 5 episodes. Some had 1 scene. But the show's texture, the sense that this penthouse existed inside a real world, came from the recurring faces that appeared, did the work, and stepped back. Betty Lynn is Miss Lee, Uncle Bill's secretary. Lynn was already beloved as Thelma Lou from The Andy Griffith Show. She is 99 years old in 2026, the oldest living person connected to this production. Sherry Alberoni is Sharon James, Cissy's best friend, who also had a voice acting career at Hanna-Barbera. She is alive in 2026. Carl Lucas is Scotty Parker, the building superintendent who gave the penthouse a neighborhood. He died in 1992. Greg Federson is Greg Bartlett, Cissy's boyfriend on screen, and in real life, the son of producer Don Federson, which meant he was dating Kathy Garver on and off the screen simultaneously. That detail was not publicized at the time. They were the wallpaper that made the room believable. Television runs on people like this. Family Affair ran for 5 seasons, 138 episodes, and 1 premise. That 3 children without parents, placed in the care of 1 unprepared bachelor and 1 impeccably prepared butler, could find something that functioned as a family if everyone tried hard enough. The people who built that premise received the full range of what life actually delivers. One girl was America's safest child and was gone at 18. One man was television's steadiest guardian and died 19 days after his daughter. One elegant Englishman made dignity look effortless and was gone at 59. One boy had his earnings disappear, lost his screen twin, fought his way back, and now helps others do the same. One woman stepped in at the last minute and spent 60 years turning survival into authorship. One woman watched her husband be murdered in front of her and continued. One man held the space when the original couldn't. One woman carried the largest career on the call sheet and arrived for the final season. And one man made Uncle Bill's world feel real, 8 episodes at a time. The show said love was enough. It wasn't always. But the people who made that case, week after week, in a New York penthouse that never existed, deserved more than they received. Every one of them.